In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire stood as one of the most formidable forces in the world, controlling territories across 3 continents and expanding its influence over the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. With strategic goals in mind, the Ottomans turned their attention to Sudan, recognizing the region's value as a gateway between the Red Sea and the Nile Valley. By establishing control over Sudan, the empire could reinforce its trade networks, enhance military reach, and solidify its presence in Africa. However, the Ottomans' arrival stirred tensions with Sudan's indigenous groups, giving rise to a complex story of cultural exchange, conflict, and adaptation. In 1517, after the Ottomans defeated the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, they quickly looked southward, seeking to expand into the territories bordering Egypt. The Red Sea coast, in particular, held significant importance as it provided access to trade routes and acted as a protective barrier against European powers that sought influence in the region. The Ottoman Empire sent its forces to conquer strategic ports along the Sudanese coast, such as Suakin, which they fortified and transformed into a regional base of operations. Unlike their conquests in Egypt and the Levant, where Ottoman rule was more centralized, their presence in Sudan was less direct. The Ottomans ruled through local leaders or governors who acted as intermediaries, with limited Turkish settlers gradually arriving to reinforce Ottoman control. They established garrisons, introduced Turkish soldiers, and implemented their administrative systems, hoping to integrate Sudan into the empire while maintaining local stability. The indigenous population in Sudan consisted of a diverse tapestry of ethnic groups, each with its own social structure, language, and traditions. Many Sudanese communities, including the Beja, Funj, and Nubian tribes, maintained autonomy and developed unique identities shaped by centuries of trade, migration, and cultural exchange along the Nile Valley. The arrival of Turkish settlers disrupted this balance, as the Ottomans sought to impose their administrative practices and collect taxes, especially from nomadic tribes who were unaccustomed to centralized control. Ottoman influence began to affect local governance, as Turkish officials introduced a new form of leadership and taxation system. However, the Ottomans faced resistance from many indigenous groups, especially those in the Funj Sultanate, who held significant power in central Sudan. The Funj sultans viewed Ottoman expansion with suspicion, concerned that the Turks aimed to erode their authority. The Ottomans' attempts to subjugate local leaders only hardened the Funj's resolve, leading to frequent clashes and tense relations between the Turkish settlers and Sudanese rulers. As Turkish settlers began to establish themselves in Sudan, they brought with them Ottoman culture, language, and Islamic practices. The Ottomans introduced Turkish-style architecture, military techniques, and administrative customs, some of which were embraced by Sudanese elites. The Turkish influence was most visible in port cities like Suakin and Sawakin, where Turkish architectural styles reshaped the landscape, blending with the Red Sea culture. Yet, for many Sudanese, the Ottomans were seen as foreign intruders. While both the Ottomans and Sudanese practiced Islam, there were significant differences in religious practices and interpretations of Islamic law. Sudanese Muslims often followed traditional Sufi practices, with Sufi brotherhoods playing a central role in their spiritual and community life. The Ottomans, with their centralized form of Sunni Islam, clashed with Sudanese Sufis over religious rituals and authority. This religious divide deepened mistrust and added a layer of cultural resistance against Ottoman settlers. The Ottoman presence in Sudan also impacted the local economy, especially in regions along the Nile and Red Sea. Ottoman officials established tax systems aimed at extracting resources to fund their empire, which included levies on trade and agricultural production. They sought to control the lucrative trade routes that connected Sudan to Egypt and Arabia, hoping to benefit from the movement of goods such as gold, ivory, and slaves. However, these economic policies often disadvantaged local communities who were unaccustomed to Ottoman taxation and resented the extraction of resources from their land. Indigenous leaders resisted Ottoman demands for tribute, leading to conflicts over grazing lands, water sources, and trade monopolies. Nomadic tribes along the Nile clashed with Turkish forces over control of resources, as they resisted Ottoman interference in their traditional ways of life. These tensions culminated in frequent skirmishes and uprisings, which the Ottomans struggled to suppress due to the vast and rugged Sudanese landscape. The Funj Sultanate, which held sway over much of central Sudan, became a focal point of resistance against Ottoman encroachment. The Funj rulers were determined to maintain their sovereignty and protect their land from Turkish settlers. The sultans of the Funj were adept at diplomacy, at times negotiating with the Ottomans to avoid outright conflict while preserving their autonomy. However, when diplomacy failed, the Funj leaders organized military resistance, engaging in battles with Ottoman forces to push back their expansion. In the western regions, other Sudanese tribes also resisted Turkish control, forming coalitions to defend their territories. This resistance was not only motivated by the desire for independence, but also by cultural pride and a reluctance to accept foreign rule. The Sudanese people viewed the Ottomans as outsiders, and the presence of Turkish garrisons in their cities became a symbol of foreign domination. This sentiment persisted throughout the Ottoman occupation, as Sudanese leaders continuously fought to protect their cultural heritage and prevent the erosion of their customs. Despite the resistance they faced, the Ottoman settlers left an indelible mark on Sudanese society. Over time, a gradual fusion of Turkish and Sudanese elements emerged, especially in the coastal cities and among the elite classes who adopted some Ottoman customs. Turkish words entered the Sudanese dialect, and Ottoman clothing styles and cuisine influenced local practices. The Ottomans also built infrastructure, such as fortresses and trade routes, which later contributed to Sudan's economic development. Yet, the legacy of conflict persisted. For many Sudanese, the Ottoman period represented a time of foreign domination and cultural imposition, sparking a legacy of resistance that influenced later struggles for autonomy. The Turkish influence receded in the 19th century as the Ottoman grip on Sudan weakened due to internal issues and external pressures from European powers. Nonetheless, the Ottoman legacy in Sudan continued to shape the cultural landscape, blending Turkish influences with Sudanese traditions in a unique fusion that defined the region's history. The story of Turkish settlers in 16th-century Sudan is a chapter of both conflict and adaptation. While the Ottomans aimed to expand their empire and integrate Sudan into their sphere of influence, they faced determined resistance from indigenous groups. Sudanese leaders, from the powerful Funj Sultanate to smaller tribal coalitions, defended their land, culture, and independence against Ottoman incursions.